theme for July is freedom. Just because July is kind of the freedom month, right? And I thought maybe we would start with a question this morning. Here's the question. Can anyone show me freedom? Come up here, put it on the lectern, one single object that everyone, not just here but around the world, would agree and say, oh yeah, that's freedom, right? You know, we have lots of symbols. We have lots of metaphors that can capture some of the essence of what freedom means, but as a thing in itself, you can't hold it in the palm of your hand. You can't pour it from a bottle. It has no physical existence that we're aware of yet. But I think everyone here this morning would agree that it is real, right? It's real. It's so real that it became a core value of a new nation. Freedom, it's real, but it's intangible. It's a value, it's an idea. It's part of the intangible side of reality, which, as you know, is how I like to define spirituality, the intangible side of reality. We can experience it, we can talk about it, we just can't put it in a bottle. It's intangible, but it's not an abstraction. Sometimes I think people shy away from the whole idea of spirituality because they think it's too abstract and too impractical, but when it comes to freedom, it's practical because it's real. We can experience it. We know what it is. And yet, we didn't invent it, did we? We didn't invent it. Nobody owns it. In principle, the idea of freedom, in principle, freedom has been around as long as human beings have. But it really wasn't put into expression on a large scale until maybe about 300 years ago, when the world went through one of these sea changes that they call the Enlightenment. A major shift in consciousness. People were waking up to the realization that ideas were just as powerful as the forces of nature. In fact, they realized that ideas could be just as dangerous as the forces of nature. Think about the idea of freedom. The people that grabbed a hold of that idea in this country, they were regarded as dangerous radicals. They were guilty of treason, revolutionaries, traitors, right? If you put your signature on that Declaration of Independence, you were marked for death. There's a quote that's attributed to Benjamin Franklin. We're not exactly sure that he said it, but I like to think that he did. He said, "We must indeed all hang together, or assuredly we will all hang separately." Dangerous, dangerous idea. And then there's that one line from the Declaration that everyone knows, that everyone says, this one here, probably everyone knows that by heart. We hold these truths to be self-evident. That all men are created equal. That they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. That among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The best part of all for me is that the primary author of the Declaration of Independence was Thomas Jefferson. Take a guess, if you will, what his profession was. Come on. Yeah, that's right. He was a lawyer. He was a lawyer. My noble profession for over 20 years, so keep that in mind the next time you hear a lawyer joke, okay? Because back in the days when the medical profession was still drilling holes in people's heads or bleeding them out to let the bad vapors go, lawyers were drafting that language up there. They were drafting the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, all right? Okay, enough of a plug for my former profession. So here's the thing. Of course, we know now, we all know that when they use those words, all men are created equal, they really meant all men, and just white men. Women and black people were not included. Even as they talked about freedom, the founders of this country were shackled by a pernicious form of ideology which insisted that women and people of color were inferior to white, male, European Christians. All right? Ideology. Ideology is something that you believe just because you believe it. You believe it because it was taught to you. You believe it because it was handed down to you by your parents, or it's in this book over here someplace and we just believe it, and anyone who has any proof to the contrary, well, you're just wrong because this is what we believe. That's how ideology works, at least at its worst. At its worst. They got that ideology I was just talking about the superiority of white male Europeans, Christians. They got that from the Bible. And they got that from traditions that were created by, guess who, other white male Europeans. No amount of evidence would convince them that perhaps they might be wrong about that. That's the tyranny of ideology. It's immune to facts. It's immune to evidence, even when it perpetuates some of the greatest injustices in the history of humankind. It's immune to facts, and that's why those things happen. Every time I hear someone say that we have to get back to the kind of country that the founders intended, I politely remind them that in that country, women had no property rights and couldn't vote, and if you were a slave, you counted as 3/5 of a human being according to the U.S. Constitution. Once that ideology became entrenched in our culture, well, the people who were trying to abolish slavery, the people who wanted women to have the vote, the abolitionists, the suffragettes, they became the enemies of freedom. That's how it worked. But of course we know ultimately they won. Justice ultimately prevailed because those people dared to engage in a process of redefinition. They dared to redefine freedom by expanding it to include those who had previously been specifically included. And there were those who said, oh no, they said, stop. How dare you try to redefine freedom in a way that goes against my Bible and my tradition, my ideology. The great thing is that freedom has a way of pulling us along despite that kind of resistance. The abolitionists, the suffragettes, once the enemies of freedom, became the true champions of freedom. That's how we think of them today, and they won. Those who opposed them, well, they were left in the dust on the wrong side of history. That's the power of freedom. It pulls us along in spite of ourselves, or maybe I should say, in spite of our false selves. Eventually we come to learn how wrong we were to allow slavery for so long in this country and deny women the right to vote. How wrong we were to round up Americans of Japanese descent, American citizens of Japanese descent, confiscate their property and put them in prison camps. How wrong we were to drive Native Americans from the land they lived in for thousands of years. How wrong we were to turn away Jewish refugees from the Holocaust and send them back to their deaths. And yet freedom was a force that couldn't be denied because it exceeds the boundaries of our limited understanding. It exceeds the boundaries of our unreasonable fears, our petty prejudices, our bigotry. It's almost as if freedom were this metaphysical force for good in the universe. I don't quite believe that, but it's a powerful idea. It's a poetic way of looking at it. And even when we get it wrong, like we have in the past, it has the ability to be self-correcting. Every effort made to exclude people and create more of those boundaries, barriers, and walls ultimately failed simply because it was wrong. It ran counter to that core value of freedom, which wants openness and inclusivity. I like to think of freedom as a divine idea. That's a term that you hear our Unity co-founder Charles Fillmore talk about, divine ideas. Here's how Charles Fillmore defined a divine idea. He says, divine ideas are man's inheritance. They are pregnant with all possibility because ideas are the foundation and cause of all that man desires. Get behind a thing into the mental realm where it exists as an inexhaustible idea, and you can draw upon it perpetually and never deplete the source. Never deplete the source. For a more updated definition of a divine idea, here's something from a book called Heart-Centered Metaphysics by Reverend Paul Hasselbeck. He calls divine ideas the fundamental truth that underlie and transcend all physical manifestation. He says divine ideas are spiritual patterns that pertain to all of us. They are all the components known to our mind that constitute what we call the good. And I would add that they're also true and beautiful. A divine idea will always demonstrate the ability to advance the common good in the physical realm. A divine idea will always demonstrate the ability to advance the common good in the physical realm, even as human beings try to block it or negate it. And here's the thing, if it really is a divine idea, it can't be blocked or negated, but we still try. Here's another word for you. One you don't hear much in Unity: sin. Sin is a word you don't hear too often, but I think this is a place where it applies. There's a very well-known Unity minister and a highly respected teacher at Unity School for 27 years. His name was Ed Rabel. Joe, you might have known Ed Rabel. It was a little bit before my time. He passed away in 2004. But Ed Rabel used to say that sin is any attempt to negate a divine idea. That's good. Sin is any attempt to negate a divine idea. Now remember, a divine idea can't be negated, but we still try. And when we do that, we're actually working against the common good. Because remember, divine ideas always work out to prove the common good, to support the common good. So we try to negate a divine idea, we work against the common good, and ultimately to the detriment of humankind. There's that old saying, we're not punished for our sins, but we're punished by them. That's what happens when we try to negate a divine idea. That's how it works. So, the major difference between divine ideas and ideology is that ideology will attempt to negate a divine idea if it gets in the way. Even if the facts and the evidence are on the side of the divine idea, we can prove that it works, we can prove that it advances the common good, ideology will ignore it and will attempt to block it and negate it if it gets in the way of the goals that the ideology is trying to achieve. Ideology comes in a lot of forms: religious, political. Some forms are more pernicious than others, but it all boils down usually to an appeal to our emotions. Ideology is non-rational. They appeal to our emotions, especially the darker ones like fear and anger. Religion has always been good at doing that. They create a world that's under assault by Satan and various demons, and they promise to keep you safe if you sign on, if you say and do the right things. And as if the living world of today that they create isn't scary enough, with Satan and the demons running amok, they create the promise of hellfire and eternal torture in the afterlife to drive even more fear and darkness, more obedience and compliance based on an appeal to our emotions. They say, well, it's bad now, and I'll tell you what, it's going to be even worse in the future, but if you join our group, you'll be safe. Forget about freedom, just do what we say, and you'll be okay. You'll even be rewarded. Fortunately, divine ideas don't work in a vacuum. They work together. Another powerful, powerful divine idea that Fillmore talks about is love. Major theme of the music that Chad and Mark brought to us today. The power of love. It's a divine idea. Here's what Fillmore says. Love in divine mind is the idea of universal unity. In expression, it is the power that joins and binds together the universe and everything in it. Love is a harmonizing, constructive power. When it is made active in consciousness, it reconstructs, rebuilds, and restores man and his world. Substitute gender-neutral words all the way through there because that's the way they spoke back in those days. Again, despite any attempt to do so, a divine idea cannot be negated. Love, as the idea of universal unity, will always demonstrate the ability to advance the common good. It's an expression of the true, the good, and the beautiful. Even when we get it wrong and we settle for an expression of love that's limited by our limited understanding, it's self-correcting if we're patient. And love is patient. Where have I heard that before? Those who try to negate the divine ideas of freedom and love do so by attempting to sow fear and anger. And our job, in the face of all that, is to say no. And remember that Divine ideas are inexhaustible and can never be depleted. Freedom is inclusive and liberating. Love unites and uplifts. And maybe, just maybe, that's why the lawyers who wrote the Constitution started off with these words. We, the people, in order to form a more perfect union. Key words there. We, together, united. They go on to talk about promoting the general welfare. As we know, divine ideas have a way of advancing the common good. The common good, or dare I say, a world that works for all. That's the framework here. That's the framework. We're the ones who have to stay focused on the truth and the power of divine ideas. We're the ones that have to work to move past the barriers that are created by our limited understanding so that these ideas can ultimately work for everyone. So that's your mission, should you choose to accept it for this week. Come on back next week and we'll see how things are going in the world then. Thank you all.